Bastien Moreau knew he was probably going to die in these woods, lost and feverish from an infected wound on his leg. Barely able to think straight after 3 days without proper food or water, when he heard the screams that cut through his delirium like a knife and forced his broken body into motion toward a sound that any sensible person would have fled from, but that his conscience, stubborn and inconvenient even when survival demanded ruthless practicality, insisted he investigate. He crashed through the underbrush, his French-Canadian hunter's instincts navigating terrain his fever-clouded mind could barely process, and emerged onto a rocky clearing to witness a nightmare. 2 Mohican women, both unusually tall and powerful in build, trapped on a stone outcrop by a black bear so massive it seemed impossible, a creature of fur and rage that had them cornered and was preparing to charge. Bastien had perhaps 3 seconds to decide between self-preservation and intervention, between walking away from certain death or rushing toward it. And in those 3 seconds he discovered that even a man who thought he had lost everything still had something left to give, even if that something was his own worthless life in exchange for saving 2 strangers who would probably not even remember his name. If stories about courage emerging from desperation, about the impossible choices that define who we truly are, and about honor transcending culture divides move you, subscribe now, because this journey will challenge everything you believe about justice, tradition, and what it means to save a life. Bastien was 26 years old, a hunter and trapper who had come to Hudson Valley 3 years earlier seeking fortune that had never materialized. He was moderately skilled, reasonably honest, and perpetually unlucky in ways that seemed almost comical until they became tragic. His latest misfortune had begun 4 days ago when he stepped in an animal burrow while tracking deer, twisting his ankle badly. The injury had become infected despite his attempts to clean and bandage it, and fever had set in 2 days later. Disoriented and weak, Bastien had become hopelessly lost, wandering in circles through forests that all looked the same to his fever-addled perception. He had run out of food, his water was nearly gone, and he knew that if he didn't find help soon, he would simply lie down and never get up again. Part of him had already accepted this fate with a resignation that comes from years of disappointment. Then he had heard the screams and found himself running toward them despite his injured leg, despite his fever, despite every logical reason to conserve what little strength he had left. The bear was enormous, easily 7 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs, with claws that could disembowel a man with a single swipe. The 2 Mohican women were armed with knives, but clearly recognized that fighting this creature would be suicide. They were trapped, with nowhere to retreat and no way to escape without passing within striking distance of the bear. Bastien didn't think. Thinking would have reminded him that he was in no condition to fight anything, that he had only a hunting knife, that charging a bear was the action of a madman or a suicidal fool. Instead, he simply acted. He screamed as loud as his fever-weakened lungs would allow, waving his arms and running directly at the bear. The bear turned toward this new threat, confused by the sudden appearance of another human. Bastien kept screaming, kept advancing, even as every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to flee. He threw rocks, sticks, anything he'd grab, focusing the bear's attention entirely on himself and away from the trapped women. "Move!" He shouted at them in French, then tried what little Mohican he knew. "Go, run now!" The 2 women didn't need further encouragement. They scrambled off the rocky outcrop and ran, but they didn't abandon him. Instead, they flanked the bear from both sides, shouting and throwing stones, creating enough confusion and threat that the massive predator finally decided this much resistance wasn't worth whatever territorial instinct had driven to corner them in the first place. The bear dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the forest, leaving 3 humans shaking with adrenaline and the aftermath of mortal terror. Bastien collapsed immediately, his infected leg unable to support him any longer. The surge of desperate energy that had carried him to the confrontation now completely spent. The 2 Mohican women approached him cautiously. Up close, Bastien could see they were both remarkably tall for women, perhaps 5 feet 9 or 10 inches, with a powerful build of people who had spent their lives in physical labor. They were also clearly sisters, their faces similar enough to be unmistakable. The taller of the 2 knelt beside Bastien and examined his leg with practiced efficiency. She spoke in Mohican, words he didn't understand, then tried broken English. "You sick?" she said. Leg bad. You'd die soon if no help. Probably, Bastian agreed, his vision starting to gray at the edges. Sorry for interfering. Saw you needed help. Couldn't walk away. The second sister joined them, speaking rapidly to her sibling in Mohican. They seemed to be debating something urgently. Finally, the first sister looked at Bastian with an expression that mixed gratitude with concern. You save us from Bear, she said carefully. We must save you now. But there's problem. What problem? Bastian managed to ask before darkness claimed him and he fell into unconsciousness. Bastian woke to pain and the smell of herbal poultices. He was lying on a sleeping mat in a longhouse, his leg wrapped in clean bandages that had been expertly applied. The fever that had clouded his mind for days had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Voices spoke in Mohican nearby, and Bastian turned his head slowly to see the two sisters from the Bear encounter sitting with an older woman who appeared to be treating his wound. The taller sister noticed he was awake and approached. I am Kimamila, she said in halting English. My sister is Takota. You are in our village. Our healers help you. Thank you, Bastian replied, his voice hoarse. I am Bastian. I apologize for whatever trouble I have caused. Kimamila's expression grew troubled. You save our lives from Bear, she said. This creates debt we must repay. But you also did something forbidden. She struggled to find the English words. You interfere in test. Test, Bastian repeated, confused. Takota joined them, her English slightly better than her sister's. We were on vision trial, she explained. Young warriors, both men and women, must face danger alone to prove courage and receive guidance from spirits. The Bear was our test. By helping us, you violated sacred tradition. Now our father, the Sachem, must decide what this means. Before Bastian could process this information, the longhouse entrance opened and several people entered. At the center was a man in his 50s with a bearing and regalia of significant authority. His face was stern, marked by traditional tattoos, and his eyes held the weight of difficult decisions. The two sisters immediately stood and lowered their heads respectfully. The Sachem spoke in Mohican, his voice controlled but clearly angry. Kimamila translated quietly for Bastian. Our father, Sachem Hassan, says you have created a great problem. He is grateful his daughters live, but you have broken sacred law. He must decide your fate. Sachem Hassan studied Bastian with an intensity that made the young hunter want to look away, but force himself to maintain eye contact. The Sachem spoke again, and this time an elderly man who had entered with him translated into French, apparently recognizing Bastian's accent. I am Mikasi, spiritual advisor to Sachem Hassan. The old man said, I will help you understand your situation. Our tradition requires young warriors to face danger alone as their trial of courage. Outside interference is forbidden because it corrupts the purity of the test and the visions that should come from facing death with only one's own strength and spirit. I did not know, Bastian said. I only saw two people about to be killed by a bear. I could not simply watch. Your ignorance does not erase the violation, Mikasi replied, but your courage and your intent matter. This creates complexity. By our oldest laws, you should be punished, possibly executed, for interfering in sacred ceremony. But you also saved the lives of the Sachem's beloved daughters. This creates a debt that demands reward, possibly adoption into the clan with full rights and privileges. How can both things be true? Bastian asked, his head spinning from more than just lingering fever. That is exactly the question Sachem Hassan must answer, Mikasi said, and his decision will set precedent for how we handle such situations in the future. If he chooses law over gratitude, it sends message that tradition cannot be broken even for good reasons. If he chooses gratitude over law, it suggests that outcomes matter more than proper procedure. Both paths have consequences beyond just your fate. A council was called for following day, giving Bastian time to recover more of his strength and to understand the full complexity of his situation. Kimamila and Takota visited him frequently, bringing food and explaining more about their culture. They were unusually tall for Mohican women, both standing nearly equal in height to most men, and had trained as warriors despite the traditional expectation that women would focus on agriculture and domestic work. Our mother died when we were young, Kimamila explained, "Our father, in his grief, allowed us to train with our brothers. We became skilled with bow and blade, went on hunts, learned to fight. But to be fully recognized as warriors, we needed to complete the vision trial. And I ruined that for you," Bastian said with guilt. Dakota shook her head. "You saved our lives. The bear would have killed us. Our trial was poorly timed. The bear was protecting cubs nearby that we did not know about. It would not have retreated or been frightened away. We would have died trying to pass it. So I prevented deaths that would have resulted from a trial meant to prove you could handle death," Bastian observed. "The irony is almost funny. Our father does not find it funny," Kimamila said seriously. "He is torn between his heart as a father and his duty as Sachem. Other Sachems and clan leaders are watching to see what he decides. Some want him to uphold tradition strictly. Others see this as opportunity to show flexibility and adaptation." The council convened in the largest longhouse, filled with Sachems, clan mothers, warriors, and spiritual advisors from not just this village but several others in the region. Bastian was brought before them, still weak but able to stand with support. The discussion was entirely in Mohican, leaving Bastian to watch faces and body language, while Makasi occasionally whispered translations of key points. The debate was intense and divided. Some argued passionately that sacred law could not be bent without destroying its meaning. Others pointed out that Bastian's courage and selflessness demonstrated the very qualities a vision trial was meant to reveal. Still others worried about setting precedents that might encourage European interference in indigenous customs. Finally, Sachem's son stood to speak. The longhouse fell silent. The Sachem's voice was heavy with emotion as he addressed the assembly. Mikasi translated quietly for Bastian's benefit. "I stand before you as both a father and a leader," Sachem's son said. "My heart rejoices that my daughters live, but my duty requires me to uphold the laws that have guided our people for generations. These two truths exist together, and I cannot choose one without betraying the other." He paused, looking directly at Bastian. "This young man violated our sacred tradition through ignorance, not malice. He risked his life, already weakened by fever and injury, to save strangers. This shows courage and spirit that our vision trials seek to cultivate. Yet his interference corrupted the trial itself, denied my daughters the full spiritual experience they sought." Sachem's son continued speaking, his words carrying the weight of both personal feeling and political necessity. "Therefore, I propose a solution that honors both tradition and the debt we owe," he said. "Bastian Moreau will undergo his own vision trial. He will face danger alone without assistance and prove whether his courage in saving my daughters was momentary impulse or true character. If he succeeds, he will be adopted into our clan with full rights. If he fails, the spirits will have judged him, and no human punishment will be necessary." The council erupted in discussion. Mikasi leaned close to Bastian. "This is unusual but not unprecedented," he explained. "You will be sent into the wilderness alone for 3 days and nights. You must survive, face whatever challenges arise, and return with evidence of a spiritual vision or significant trial overcome. It is dangerous, especially for someone not raised in our ways, but it gives you a chance." "What if I refuse?" Bastian asked quietly. "Then you'll be exiled from all Mohican territories and marked as one who violated sacred law," Mikasi replied. "Any Mohican who encounters you will be within their rights to kill you. You would have to flee to distant colonies and never return to this region." Bastian looked at Kimamila and Dakota, who watched it with expressions that mixed hope and concern. He thought about his options: exile to unknown territories with nothing but the clothes on his back, or a trial that might kill him, but at least offer the possibility of belonging to something larger than his own failed attempts at making a life in this wilderness. "I accept the trial," Bastian said loudly enough for the assembly to hear. The preparation for his vision trial took 2 days, allowing Bastian's leg to heal enough for travel. Mikasi and other spiritual advisors instructed him on what to expect, though they were deliberately vague about specifics. "You must find your own path," Mikasi explained. "The trial is different for each person. The spirits will guide you toward what you need to face." Kimamila and Dakota were forbidden from speaking to him directly during the preparation period, but they found ways to help indirectly. Takota left a particularly good knife near where Bastian was staying. Kimamila ensured the healers gave him extra strengthening herbs. These small gestures reminded Bastian that he wasn't entirely alone, even as he prepared to face the wilderness in isolation. On the morning of the trial, the entire village gathered to witness his departure. Sachem, his son, spoke formal words in Mohican that Mikasi translated. You go now as one suspended between worlds, neither Mohican nor outsider, neither guilty nor innocent. The spirits will judge your heart and your courage. Return in 3 days with proof of your trial, and you will be welcomed as family. Fail to return, and we will know the spirits found you unworthy. Bastian was given only basic supplies: a knife, a fire-starting kit, a water skin, and a small pouch of dried corn. No weapon for hunting larger game, no shelter materials, nothing that would make survival easy. He was led to the edge of Mohican territory and pointed toward the deep wilderness beyond. Walk until you can no longer see the village, Mikasi instructed. Then let the spirits guide you. Do not try to survive through cleverness alone. Open yourself to visions, to messages, to the lessons the wilderness wants to teach. For the first day, Bastian simply walked, putting distance between himself and the village while trying to quiet his racing thoughts. His leg ached from exertion, but the infection had healed cleanly and the pain was manageable. He found a stream and followed it, knowing water was a most critical resource. As evening approached, he built a small shelter using branches and leaves, then made a fire and roasted some cattail roots he had gathered. That night, alone in the darkness, Bastian reflected on the path that had brought him here. He had come to America seeking fortune, and had found only failure. He had tried to live as a solitary hunter, and had nearly died from infected wounds and fever. He had saved 2 women from a bear, and had somehow ended up on trial for his courage. Nothing in his life had gone according to plan, yet here he was, still alive, still fighting, still trying to find his place in a world that seemed determined to reject him. On the second day, Bastian encountered a challenge that tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He found a young doe caught in what appeared to be a trap set by another hunter. The animal was terrified and injured, thrashing against a snare that held its leg. Bastian's first instinct was to free it, but he realized this presented a moral dilemma. The deer could provide food he desperately needed. Killing it would be practical, would ensure his survival through the remaining days of the trial, but it would also be taking advantage of another hunter's work, and it would mean killing something helpless rather than fairly hunted. Bastian stood there for a long time, wrestling with a decision. Finally, he approached the doe carefully, speaking softly calm it, and cut the snare. The deer bounded away into the forest, leaving Bastian hungry, but feeling strangely at peace with his choice. That night, as Bastian sat by his fire, he heard movement in the darkness. His hand went to his knife, but what emerged from the shadows was not a predator. It was Kimamila, moving silently through the forest. She shouldn't have been there, Bastian knew immediately. Her presence violated the terms of his trial. You should not be here, Bastian said in his broken Mohican. This is forbidden. Kimamila sat across the fire from him. I know, she said in English, but I had to speak with you, to explain something that my father and the council did not say. What is that? Bastian asked. The trial is not just about whether you survive, Kimamila said. It is about what kind of person you reveal yourself to be when no one is watching. The spirits see all actions, all choices. Today you freed the deer when you could have killed it for food. That choice matters more than any physical courage. How do you know about the deer? Bastian asked, surprised. Because I have been watching over you from a distance, Kimamila admitted, not to help, but to witness. To tell my father and the council what you do when you think you are alone. This is part of the trial, though it is not spoken of openly. So I am not actually alone, Bastian said, feeling strangely both comforted and betrayed. You are alone in that no one will help you if danger comes, Kimamila replied. But you are witnessed, as all vision trials are witnessed. How else would the spirits communicate what they have shown you? She stood to leave, but paused. My sister and I owe you our lives, she said. Whatever happens, know that we will speak for you before the council. We will tell them that you have the heart of a warrior and the spirit of someone who sees beyond himself." After Kimamila departed, Bastian sat by the fire, understanding his trial with new clarity. This wasn't just about surviving 3 days in the wilderness. It was about revealing his character through his choices when he thought no one was watching. On the third and final day of his trial, Bastian woke before dawn with a sense that something significant was about to happen. He had survived the required time, had made choices he believed honored both courage and compassion, but he felt the trial was not yet complete. The spirits, if they existed as the Mohican believed, had not yet delivered their message clearly enough for him to articulate upon his return. He broke camp and began walking, letting intuition rather than logic guide his direction. The forest seemed different this morning, charged with energy he couldn't quite name. Birds sang in patterns that felt almost like communication. The sunlight filtering through the canopy created designs that seemed deliberate rather than random. Bastian found himself in a heightened state of awareness, noticing details that would normally escape his attention. Around midday, he came upon a clearing that took his breath away. At the center stood a massive oak tree, easily centuries old, its trunk so wide that 5 men holding hands could barely encircle it. The tree's branches spread in perfect symmetry, creating a natural cathedral of leaves and light. At the base of the tree, arranged in a careful circle, were 7 stones of different colors and sizes. Bastian approached slowly, sensing this place held significance. As he stepped into the clearing, he suddenly heard voices, though whether they were real or in his mind he couldn't say. They spoke not in words but in feelings, in understanding that bypassed language entirely. He felt the presence of something ancient, something that had existed in this place long before Europeans or even the indigenous peoples had walked these forests. The vision came suddenly and completely. Bastian saw the future stretching before him in multiple possible paths. One path showed him returning to his solitary hunting life, never truly connecting with anyone, dying alone and unmourned in some forgotten corner of the wilderness. Another path showed him integrated into the Mohican community, learning their ways, building a family, but always carrying the knowledge that he was adopted rather than born to the people who accepted him. A third path revealed itself, more complex and challenging than either of the first 2. In this vision, Bastian saw himself as a bridge between worlds, someone who moved between Mohican and European communities, translating not just words but intentions and perspectives. He saw himself mediating conflicts, preventing misunderstandings that could lead to violence, helping both sides see the humanity in the other. This path was lonely in a different way than solitary hunting, filled with mistrust from both sides, but it was also meaningful in ways the other paths were not. The vision faded, leaving Bastian kneeling at the base of the ancient oak, tears streaming down his face, though he couldn't say exactly why. He understood now what the trial had been teaching him. Courage wasn't just about charging at bears or surviving in the wilderness. It was about choosing the harder path when easier ones were available, about serving something larger than personal comfort or safety. He stood slowly and noticed something he hadn't seen before. Nestled in the roots of the oak tree was a perfectly formed bird's nest that had fallen from the branches above. Inside the nest were 3 unbroken eggs, pale blue and delicate. Bastian carefully picked up the nest, cradling it gently. This would be his proof, his evidence of the trial overcome. Not a trophy taken from a killed animal, not a dramatic scar from a dangerous encounter, but something fragile and precious that he had chosen to protect rather than destroy. As Bastian made his way back toward the Mohican village, he felt fundamentally changed. The fever weakened, lost hunter who had stumbled upon 2 women being threatened by a bear seemed like a different person entirely. That man had acted from desperate impulse. The man returning from this trial had acted from conscious choice, from understanding that every decision revealed character and created consequences that rippled outward beyond immediate sight. He arrived at the village as the sun was setting on the 3rd day, precisely when the trial period would end. The entire community had gathered at the village entrance, waiting. Sachem, his son, stood at the center with Makasi beside him. Kimamila and Takota stood among the crowd, their faces anxious but hopeful. Bastian Moreau, Sachem, his son, called out in formal tones. "You departed 3 days ago to face trial by wilderness and spirit. Have you returned with proof of your testing? Bastian approached and carefully held out the bird's nest with its 3 unbroken eggs. I found this at the base of an ancient oak in a sacred clearing, he said, speaking slowly in the Mohican he had been learning. The nest had fallen, but the egg survived. I chose to bring it here, safely rather than taking easier proof. He paused, then continued in a mixture of Mohican, French, and English that Makasi helped translate. The spirits showed me that my path is not to become Mohican or to remain fully European, but to stand between both worlds and help them understand each other. This is harder than either extreme, but it is what I am called to do. Mikasi examined the nest with wonder. To carry fragile eggs through 3 days of wilderness travel without breaking them shows both great care and great skill, he said. But more importantly, to choose this as your proof rather than something that demonstrates strength or violence shows wisdom. The spirits have spoken clearly. Sachem has son stepped forward, and for the first time since Bastian had met him, the stern leader smiled. My daughters told the council of your actions during the trial, he said. How you freed a trapped animal when you could have eaten it. How you chose difficulty over convenience at every turn. And now you return not with proof of dominance over nature, but with proof of protection and care. He placed his hand on Bastian's shoulder. The decision is made. You will be adopted into the Bear clan with full rights and responsibilities. You will be given a Mohican name, and you will serve our people as a bridge to the European world, helping us navigate the changes that come whether we wish them or not. The formal adoption ceremony took place that evening, with the entire village participating. Bastian was given the name Kichi, meaning brave, not for his reckless charge of the bear, but for his willingness to walk the difficult path between cultures. He was marked with traditional tattoos, welcomed into the Bear clan's longhouse, and celebrated with feasting and dancing that lasted until dawn. Kimamila and Takota approached him during a quiet moment in the celebration. We owe you our lives, Kimamila said, but you have given us more than survival. You have given us a brother and given our people a bridge to a world we do not fully understand but must learn to navigate. I am the one who is grateful, Bastian replied. I came to this land seeking fortune and found only failure. But in saving you, I found purpose. In facing the trial, I found myself. He looked around at the celebrating community. I finally found home. In the years that followed, Bastian proved himself worthy of the trust Sachem, his son, had placed in him. He traveled regularly to European settlements, trading on behalf of the Mohican people, but also serving as an interpreter and mediator when conflict arose. He learned to speak multiple indigenous languages, as well as Dutch, English, and his native French, becoming invaluable as someone who could translate not just words but cultural concepts and intentions. He married Takota in a ceremony that blended Mohican and Catholic traditions, a union that symbolized the bridge-building work he had committed to. They had 4 children who grew up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable in both Mohican longhouses and European settlements. These children would continue their father's work, serving as mediators and translators during the increasingly difficult decades as colonial expansion put ever more pressure on indigenous communities. Kimamila never married but became one of the most respected warriors in the Confederacy, her rescue from the bear becoming legendary and her combat skills unmatched. She often accompanied Bastian on his diplomatic missions, her imposing presence and fierce loyalty, ensuring his safety in situations where being a cultural bridge made him vulnerable to suspicion and violence from both sides. When Sachem, his son, died years later, his final words of Bastian were recorded by Makasi and preserved. You came to us as an outsider who violated our sacred laws, the old Sachem had said, but in choosing to save my daughters without thought for consequences, you showed the spirit our traditions seek to cultivate. In accepting the trial rather than fleeing, you showed the courage we value above all else. And in how you have lived since that day, serving both peoples with honor and dedication, you have shown that the best of us transcend the boundaries we create between ourselves and others. Bastian lived to see his grandchildren grow, watched as the world he had known slowly transformed under the relentless pressure of European expansion. The Mohican people, like all indigenous nations in the region, faced displacement, disease, and the systematic destruction of their way of life. But because of bridges Bastian and others like him had built, the transition was less violent than it might have been. More importantly, Knowledge and traditions were preserved, recorded, passed down through people who value both heritages rather than forcing a choice between them. On his deathbed, surrounded by children and grandchildren who embodied the blending of worlds he had dedicated his life to facilitating, Bastian reflected on the moment that had changed everything. If he had walked past that clearing, if he had ignored the screams, if he had chosen self-preservation over reckless courage, his life would have been completely different. Simpler, perhaps. Safer, certainly. But emptier in ways that mattered more than survival. I was lost in every sense, he told his eldest grandson. Lost in the forest, lost in life, lost in understanding what my existence meant. Then I heard screams and ran toward danger instead of away from it. That choice, that single moment of not being able to walk away from others' suffering, gave me everything that followed. It gave me family, purpose, belonging, meaning. Never underestimate the power of one courageous choice to completely reshape not just your life, but the lives of everyone connected to you. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that our most defining moments often come when we stop calculating personal advantage and simply do what conscience demands. That courage means choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. That families can be built across any divide when honor and respect form the foundation. Leave a comment about which moment in this journey resonated most deeply with you. Your support helps me continue creating these stories about the bridges we can build between different worlds, about the truth that our greatest purpose often emerges from our willingness to risk everything for strangers, and about the reality that home is not where we're born, but where we're finally seen and valued for who we truly are. Thank you for being here. And remember that somewhere today, someone needs a kind of courage that ignores personal cost and acts from pure spirit. May we all have the strength to be that person when the moment comes. Until next time, stay brave, stay compassionate, and never underestimate how one act of reckless courage can transform not just one life, but ripple across generations in ways we cannot imagine.